"Excuse me, sir, but I think you're in the wrong section." Marcus Thompson looked up from securing his weathered duffel bag under the first-class seat. The flight attendant's voice was polite, but firm, her plastic smile not reaching her eyes as she examined his faded jeans and simple gray t-shirt. "I don't think so," Marcus replied quietly, reaching into his pocket. "I have a first-class ticket." He extended the boarding pass toward the young woman whose name tag identified her as Jessica Winters. Around them, the usual bustle of boarding continued, but nearby passengers had begun to notice the exchange. Jessica barely glanced at the ticket. There must be some mistake. This section is for first-class passengers only. "Yes, I understand." Marcus's voice remained level, though a muscle tightened in his jaw. "As you can see, I have a first-class ticket." The boarding pass trembled slightly in his hand. Not from anger, but from the permanent tremor he'd carried back from his third tour, along with a Medal of Honor that currently lay wrapped in a handkerchief deep in his duffel. Jessica's gaze swept over his short military haircut, the scuffed boots, the hint of tattoo peeking from beneath his sleeve. Her nose wrinkled almost imperceptibly. "Sir, perhaps you were given this seat by accident. Let me find you something more appropriate." The emphasis she placed on the word hung in the air between them. Behind Jessica, an elderly woman in pearls frowned, leaning forward in her seat. "Is there a problem?" The woman's voice carried the weight of authority. "No problem, ma'am," Jessica answered without turning. "Just a seating confusion I'm resolving." Marcus felt heat rising to his face. After 3 days of ceremonies in Washington, all he wanted was to get home. Daniel had insisted on upgrading his ticket. Nothing but the best for the guest of honor. And Marcus had finally relented. Now he stood in the aisle, growing increasingly aware of the curious stares, the whispers, the phone cameras discreetly rising to capture the moment. "Sir," Jessica said more firmly, "this section requires proper attire. You're not dressed appropriately, and frankly, you're too—" She paused, searching for a word that wouldn't sound completely offensive. "Too disheveled for first class. If you'd please move to the main cabin." Marcus felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. The final indignity wasn't the request. It was becoming a spectacle when all he'd ever wanted was to fade into the background. 2 days earlier, Marcus had stood at attention under the glaring lights of the Pentagon Ceremony Hall, trying not to fidget as the medal was placed around his neck. The weight of it seemed disproportionate to its size, much like the burden of the memories it represented. "Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson," the general had announced, "for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." The words washed over him as his mind returned to that blood-soaked day in Kandahar, the ambush, the split-second decision, the men he'd saved, and the ones he couldn't. After the ceremony, he'd slipped away from the reception, finding a quiet corner to call Daniel. "How'd it go, hero?" Daniel's familiar voice had brought a rare smile to Marcus's face. "Don't call me that," Marcus had replied, the old refrain between them. "It went fine. Ready to come home now. Listen, I've upgraded your ticket to first class. Non-negotiable," Daniel had said before Marcus could protest. "My company, my rules. You don't need to—" "I know I don't need to. I want to. Besides, after what you've been through, the least you deserve is a comfortable seat and some decent food." Now, standing in the aisle with Jessica's words hanging in the air, that conversation seemed like it had happened in another lifetime. "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly, extending the ticket again, "this is my assigned seat, 2A." Jessica took the boarding pass with manicured fingers, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. Her lips pursed into a thin line of disapproval. "This appears to be a first-class ticket," she conceded, "but there's clearly been an error in the booking system." She lowered her voice to a whisper that was still perfectly audible to nearby passengers. "Sir, Our first-class passengers have certain expectations about their experience. Your presence would make others uncomfortable. A businessman across the aisle suddenly became very interested in his phone. A couple whispered to each other, glancing at Marcus. The elderly woman in pearls cleared her throat. "Young lady, I find your behavior far more uncomfortable than this gentleman's presence." Jessica's cheeks flushed. "Ma'am, I'm simply following company protocol regarding dress code and appropriate." "I don't need any trouble," Marcus interrupted, the tension in his shoulders visible beneath his t-shirt. "I'll move." His fingers closed around the worn strap of his duffel. Inside was not just the medal, but also the folded flag from Mike's funeral. His squad leader, who'd died saving him before Marcus had gone back for the others. Mike, who would have told him to stand his ground. But Marcus had fought enough battles. He just wanted peace. "Thank you for your understanding," Jessica said, relief flooding her features. "I'll find you a suitable seat in economy." As Marcus followed her down the aisle, he caught the sympathetic glances of other passengers. Some looked away in embarrassment. Others watched with undisguised curiosity. What none of them could see was the phone in his pocket, vibrating with a text from Daniel. "Landed yet? Can't wait to hear about the ceremony. Call when you get in." "Wait a moment," a voice called from behind them. A senior flight attendant with silver-streaked hair approached, her name tag reading Barbara. "What seems to be the issue?" Jessica straightened, professionalism coating her nervousness. "I'm relocating this passenger to economy. His ticket appears to be for first class, but clearly there's been an error with the booking." Barbara extended her hand. "May I see your boarding pass, sir?" Marcus handed it over, his expression carefully neutral despite the humiliation burning in his chest. Barbara's eyes widened slightly as she scanned the ticket, then looked up at Marcus. "This is a valid first-class ticket, purchased by—" She paused, recognition dawning in her eyes as she read the purchaser's name. "There must be some mistake," Jessica insisted. "Look at him. He's clearly not first-class material." She lowered her voice, though not enough. "He's too dirty and disheveled. The other passengers expect a certain standard." From the back of the plane, Thomas Garcia looked up from stowing a passenger's luggage. His attention caught on the man being escorted down the aisle, and something about the military bearing triggered his memory. He squinted, trying to place the face from somewhere. A base, perhaps? A ceremony? At the front, Barbara's expression hardened. "Jessica, this gentleman has a valid ticket for seat 2A, but the dress code is a guideline, not grounds for removal," Barbara interrupted firmly. "Sir, please return to your assigned seat." Marcus shook his head slightly. "It's fine. I'm happy to sit back here." The last thing he wanted was to be paraded back to first class after this scene. Jessica looked triumphant. "See? He doesn't mind." Barbara frowned. "That's not the point." "Really," Marcus insisted. "I prefer it." He thought of the crowded transport helicopters, soldiers packed shoulder to shoulder. "I'm used to tight spaces." Barbara hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but unwilling to force the issue against Marcus's wishes. "If you're certain." "I am." Marcus slid into the middle seat in row 23, wedged between a businessman engrossed in his laptop and a teenager with blaring headphones. As Jessica turned to leave, satisfaction clear in her smug smile, Thomas finally placed the face. His stomach dropped as he remembered where he'd seen Marcus Thompson. On the cover of the military newspaper just yesterday. The Medal of Honor ceremony. This was the guy everyone was talking about. The one who'd carried 3 wounded men through gunfire. Marcus settled into the cramped space, pulling out his phone. The text from Daniel still waited for a response. After a moment's consideration, he hit dial instead of text. "Hey, it's me," he said quietly when Daniel answered. "Small issue with the flight." He kept his voice low, not wanting to draw more attention. "Nothing urgent. Just wanted to let you know I might be delayed." He paused, listening. "No, everything's fine. Just a seating mix-up." He ended the call, unaware that Thomas Garcia was already making his way toward him, shocked recognition on his face. Captain Sarah Reynolds frowned at the unexpected radio message. She adjusted her headset, certain she'd misheard. "Control, could you repeat that last instruction?" "Atlantic Airways Flight 1452. You are requested to return to gate upon reaching cruising altitude. Code administrative. Repeat. Code administrative." Sarah exchanged a puzzled glance with her first officer. In 15 years of flying, she'd never received a code administrative mid-flight without prior notice. "Copy that, Control. Any additional information?" "Negative, Captain. Direct request from corporate headquarters." Sarah sighed. "Understood. We'll inform the passengers once we're level." Meanwhile, in the main cabin, Jessica moved efficiently through the aisle with the beverage cart, her composure regained after the first-class incident. Still, she couldn't help noticing the whispers as she passed. A woman in 16C leaned to her companion, casting a pointed glance Jessica's way. Completely unprofessional. "Did you see how she treated him? Heard he's military. Can you imagine?" Jessica's hands trembled slightly as she poured a diet soda. The murmurs followed her down the aisle like persistent shadows. 3 rows behind, Thomas Garcia finally reached Marcus, crouching beside his seat. "Staff Sergeant Thompson?" he asked quietly. Marcus looked up, surprised. "Do I know you?" Thomas extended his hand. "Corporal Thomas Garcia, 10th Mountain Division. Got out last year." He lowered his voice. "Sir, what happened up front? That wasn't right. I recognized you from the ceremony coverage." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "It's nothing. Please don't make a scene." "But sir, you're a medal of—" "Please," Marcus interrupted sharply. "I just want a quiet flight home." Thomas hesitated, conflict evident on his face. "Yes, sir. But for what it's worth, some of us know who you are." He gestured to his flight attendant uniform. "I've got to get back to work. But is there anything you need?" "I'm fine, Corporal." "Thank you." As Thomas reluctantly returned to his station, the aircraft leveled at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and Captain Reynolds's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I apologize for the inconvenience, but we've been instructed to return to our departure gate due to an administrative issue. Our flight time back will be approximately 20 minutes. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing." A collective groan rose from the passengers. In seat 23B, Marcus closed his eyes, knowing exactly what administrative issue had prompted their return. Jessica felt the weight of stares as she secured the beverage cart for landing. The plane banked gently, beginning its descent back to the terminal they'd left barely 20 minutes ago. "What's happening?" a passenger asked as she passed. "Why are we turning around?" "Administrative issue," Jessica repeated mechanically. "I don't have any additional information." But something felt wrong. Administrative issues were handled before takeoff, not mid-flight. She caught Barbara's eye across the cabin, but the senior attendant quickly looked away, her expression unreadable. As Jessica moved toward the front, she overheard fragments of conversation from row 7. "That guy in economy. Treated horribly. Someone must have called—" Her stomach tightened. Surely this couldn't be about the passenger she'd relocated? That had been a standard procedure. Maintaining the atmosphere of first class was company policy, wasn't it? In row 23, Marcus kept his eyes closed, not sleeping, but unwilling to engage with the curious glances from nearby passengers. The businessman beside him had finally noticed his presence and was sneaking sideways looks at the tremor in Marcus's right hand. The forced return to the gate meant facing Daniel sooner than expected. He'd hoped to downplay the incident later, maybe laugh it off over beers. Now it would be a scene, the very thing he'd been trying to avoid. A soft touch on his arm broke his contemplation. The elderly woman from first class stood in the aisle, pearl earrings catching the cabin light. "Young man," she said, her voice carrying quiet authority, "I believe this belongs to you." She handed him a small leather-bound notebook he'd left in the seat pocket. "Thank you, ma'am," Marcus replied, surprised she'd gone to the trouble. "I'm Eleanor Davis," she said, extending a hand. "What happened up there was disgraceful." Marcus shook her hand. "Marcus Thompson. And it's fine, really." "It most certainly is not fine," Mrs. Davis insisted. "That young woman should be ashamed. I've already spoken to her privately, but I intend to file a formal complaint." Marcus winced. "I'd prefer if you didn't make a fuss." "Some fusses need making, Mr. Thompson." Her eyes softened. "Military?" He nodded slightly. "My husband was Army, Korea." She squeezed his shoulder. "He would have been appalled by your treatment, as am I." Before Marcus could respond, the plane touched down with a gentle bump. Mrs. Davis steadied herself against the seat. "I believe," she said with a knowing look, "that this unscheduled return might already be your fuss in progress." The aircraft taxied to the gate with unusual speed. Through the windows, Thomas Garcia spotted the gathering crowd on the jet bridge. Men and women in dark suits, their expressions grave and purposeful. This wasn't standard procedure for any administrative issue he'd ever encountered. "Hey," whispered the passenger beside him, pointing at the group. "What's with the welcome committee?" Thomas leaned slightly. "I think it has to do with a passenger situation." "The guy who got kicked out of first class?" Thomas nodded, choosing his words carefully. "That man is Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson. He just received the Medal of Honor this week." The passenger's eyes widened. "Are you serious? And they made him move because—" "Because he wasn't dressed fancy enough," Thomas confirmed, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Flight attendant thought he didn't belong there." The whispers spread outward like ripples in still water, passengers turning to look toward row 23, where Marcus sat, still outwardly calm, despite the commotion his presence had caused. Jessica noticed the unusual gathering at the gate as she prepared for arrival. Her breath caught when she recognized Diane Mercer, the airline's director of customer experience, among them. Next to Diane stood Patrick Wilson, head of public relations, his phone pressed to his ear, gesturing emphatically. "Barbara," Jessica hissed to her senior colleague. "What's happening?" Barbara's typically friendly face had turned to stone. "I have no idea," she replied, her tone making it clear she did have some idea, but wasn't sharing. The aircraft door opened. Instead of the usual disembarkation, Captain Reynolds emerged from the cockpit and made directly for row 23. The cabin fell silent as passengers watched her progress down the aisle. She stopped beside Marcus's seat and cleared her throat. "Staff Sergeant Thompson?" Marcus looked up, resignation in his eyes. "Yes, Captain?" "Sir, I want to personally apologize for the incident during boarding." Her voice carried through the hushed cabin. "I recognized your name on the manifest, but was completing pre-flight protocols. Had I known what was happening, I would have intervened immediately." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Jessica froze in the galley, the blood draining from her face as the pieces clicked into place. "No apology necessary, Captain," Marcus replied, discomfort evident in his rigid posture. "Sir," Captain Reynolds continued, "there are some people waiting to speak with you at the gate. Would you be willing to deplane first?" Before Marcus could answer, a voice called from the front of the aircraft. "That won't be necessary, Captain." All heads turned toward the door, where a tall, distinguished man in a tailored suit now stood, his presence commanding immediate respect. Daniel Foster had arrived. Daniel Foster surveyed the cabin, his expression unreadable. 25 years in the airline business had taught him to maintain composure in crises. But this was personal. The murmurs among passengers intensified as recognition spread. The CEO himself had boarded the plane. "Jessica Winters," he called, his voice level but carrying authority that made her name sound like a summons. Jessica stepped forward, her face ashen. "Yes, sir? Please join us in the jet bridge." His tone left no room for argument. As Jessica made her way forward, Daniel's eyes found Marcus. They'd known each other since they were kids throwing rocks at freight trains in rural Pennsylvania. He'd attended Marcus's wedding and stood by him through the divorce after his second tour. He'd visited Marcus in the hospital after the ambush that earned him the medal. Now, Marcus sat in economy, looking as though he wished the floor would open and swallow him whole. "Marcus," Daniel called, softer. "You too, please." Marcus felt dozens of eyes boring into him as he rose. This public spectacle was exactly what he'd been trying to avoid by quietly moving to economy. His jaw clenched as he made his way forward, ignoring the whispers and stares. "I told you it wasn't a big deal," he muttered when he reached Daniel. "It is to me," Daniel replied, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. The genuine anger in his eyes surprised Marcus. "This isn't just about you." Mrs. Davis appeared beside them, somehow having maneuvered her way to the front despite the crowded aisle. "Excuse me," she said firmly. "I was sitting in first class during the incident. I believe my perspective would be valuable." Daniel turned to her, surprised. "And you are?" "Eleanor Davis. I witnessed everything." Her eyes flashed with determination. That young woman's behavior was completely unacceptable. Marcus found himself caught in an impossible position. Part of him wanted justice, the wounded pride of a soldier who'd faced death without flinching, but had been humiliated over a seat assignment. Yet another part, the part that had always shielded others, felt a strange urge to protect Jessica from Daniel's evident fury. "Daniel," he said quietly, "let's handle this privately." This became a public matter the moment she decided to make a scene. Daniel replied. He gestured toward the jet bridge. "The company's reputation is at stake now." Marcus looked between his oldest friend and the flight attendant, whose face had drained of all color. Whatever happened next would determine her future, and he suddenly felt the weight of that responsibility. "Fine," he conceded, "but I have conditions." The jet bridge became an impromptu tribunal, visible to curious passengers through the aircraft windows. Jessica stood rigidly before Daniel Foster, Diane Mercer, and Patrick Wilson, while Marcus leaned against the wall, his discomfort evident. "Explain yourself, Ms. Winters," Daniel began, his typically warm voice glacial. Jessica swallowed hard. "Sir, I was following what I understood to be company policy regarding appropriate appearance standards for first class. By humiliating a decorated veteran?" Daniel's voice rose slightly. "I didn't know he was—" "That's precisely the point," Daniel cut her off. "You shouldn't need to know someone's credentials to treat them with basic dignity." From inside the plane, Thomas watched through the window, explaining the situation to nearby passengers. "That's the CEO himself," he whispered to the woman next to him. "Marcus Thompson saved 3 men under heavy fire in Afghanistan, carried them one by one across open ground. The president hung that medal around his neck personally." The woman gasped. "And the flight attendant kicked him out of first class." "Because he looked too dirty," Thomas confirmed, the bitterness evident in his voice. Outside, Diane Mercer stepped forward, her corporate training taking over. "Mr. Foster, perhaps we should continue this discussion away from the passenger's view." Daniel ignored her, turning to Marcus instead. "Tell them what happened, exactly as it happened." Marcus straightened, military-bearing automatic after years of service. "It's not that complicated. The flight attendant didn't think I belonged in first class based on my appearance. She asked me to move. I moved to avoid making a scene." He shrugged. "End of story." "Not the end," Daniel countered. "Jessica, Do you understand that your actions today violated every standard of customer service this airline upholds? Jessica's professional facade cracked. Sir, I was trying to maintain the standards I was taught in training. First class has an image to uphold. An image? Marcus interrupted, surprising everyone with his sudden intensity. Let me tell you about image. I've watched men die maintaining the image of this country. I've carried friends with their insides on the outside because they believed in something bigger than appearances. His voice remained low, but vibrated with emotion. So, don't talk to me about image. A stunned silence followed. Mrs. Davis, who had followed them onto the jet bridge, nodded in approval. Well said, young man, she murmured. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, realization of her mistake finally dawning. I never meant. She turned to Marcus. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. That's the problem, Daniel said, his voice quieter now but no less severe. You shouldn't need to know someone's story to treat them with respect. Daniel leaned against the wall of the now emptied jet bridge, passengers having been escorted to another gate for rebooking. Only Marcus remained with him, both men silent for a long moment. Remember when we stole Mr. Buchanan's mailbox? Daniel finally asked, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Marcus snorted. You stole it. I was the lookout. And when he caught us, you stepped forward and said it was all your idea. Daniel shook his head. You've been taking hits for others your whole life. This isn't the same, Marcus protested. Isn't it? You were going to let it go. Call me later. Downplay the whole thing. Daniel's expression grew serious. Marcus, I've watched you absorb every blow life throws at you without complaint. Your parents' accident, Melissa leaving, what happened in Kandahar? You just keep taking it. Marcus looked away. What would complaining change? It's not about complaining. It's about standing up for yourself the way you stand up for everyone else. Daniel gestured toward the now empty plane. What that flight attendant did wasn't just wrong because you're a Medal of Honor recipient. It would have been wrong if you were anyone. On the concourse, Jessica sat alone on a bench, her career imploding around her. Diane Mercer had been clear. Termination was imminent. Patrick from PR was already drafting a public statement. Thomas Garcia spotted her as he helped redirect passengers. Against his better judgment, he approached. They're saying you're finished, he said without preamble. Jessica looked up, eyes red. I deserve it. Maybe, Thomas agreed. But do you even understand why? Because he's important. A hero. Thomas shook his head. No, because what you did was wrong regardless of who he is. I served with guys like him. They come home with visible and invisible scars, and then face judgment from people who have no idea what they've sacrificed. Meanwhile, Mrs. Davis had cornered Diane Mercer near the customer service desk. I've been flying first class with this airline for 30 years, she declared, and I've never been so embarrassed by your staff's behavior. We're addressing the situation, Mrs. Davis, Diane assured her. See that you do. That young man deserves better. My Herbert always said you can measure a society by how it treats its warriors. She straightened her pearls. This incident reflects poorly on all of us. Back in the jet bridge, Marcus finally met Daniel's gaze. What do you want me to do? He asked. I want you to tell me, honestly, what you think should happen now, Daniel replied. Not what you'll accept to avoid conflict. What you believe is right. Marcus took a deep breath, the weight of responsibility settling on shoulders, accustomed to bearing heavy burdens. In the small conference room off the main concourse, Jessica sat facing Daniel, Diane, and Patrick. Her personnel file lay open on the table, her 5 years of service reduced to a document about to be stamped with terminated. Ms. Winters, Daniel began formally, Atlantic Airways has a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior toward passengers. Based on the accounts of multiple witnesses, your actions today violated that policy in the most public and egregious manner possible. Jessica nodded, her eyes downcast. I understand, sir. Do you? Daniel leaned forward. Do you understand that you humiliated a man who's experienced things you cannot imagine? Who carries physical and mental scars from serving this country? Who, incidentally, happens to be my oldest friend? I do now, Jessica whispered, her voice breaking. And I'm truly sorry. The door opened, and Marcus entered with Thomas. Jessica's eyes widened in surprise. Before you make your final decision, Marcus said to Daniel, I'd like to say something. Daniel gestured for him to continue. Marcus stood military straight, addressing the room. What happened today was wrong, not because of who I am, but because no passenger should be judged by their appearance. He turned to Jessica. You made assumptions based on how I looked. That was a mistake. Jessica nodded, tears welling. A terrible mistake. One I'll regret forever. However, Marcus continued, firing Ms. Winters doesn't solve the underlying problem. Daniel's eyebrows shot up. You're suggesting we shouldn't terminate her employment? I'm suggesting there might be a better way. Marcus approached the table. Jessica made a mistake that exposed a flaw in your training system. Someone taught her that first class has an image to maintain. Someone reinforced the idea that worth is tied to appearance. Patrick Wilson cleared his throat nervously. As head of PR, I should point out that termination sends a clear message about our values. The story is already spreading online. We need a decisive response. And what message does firing her send? Marcus countered. That Atlantic Airways cares about public image more than addressing root causes? He turned to Jessica. If you could go back, what would you do differently? Jessica looked directly at him for the first time. Everything. I'd treat you with the respect every person deserves, regardless of appearance or status. She stood suddenly. Mr. Foster, I understand if you need to fire me. But Sergeant Thompson is right. There's a cultural problem here that goes beyond me. If you give me the chance, I want to be part of fixing it. The room fell silent. Daniel looked between Jessica and Marcus, weighing decades of friendship against corporate protocol and public relations concerns. We have a decision to make, he said finally. Beyond the conference room windows, the airport bustled with redirected passengers. News crews had begun to gather near the security checkpoint, alerted by social media posts from the flight. Patrick's phone buzzed incessantly with media inquiries. The board is calling, Diane whispered to Daniel, holding out her phone. They've seen the Twitter posts. The first-class hero is trending. Daniel waved her away, focusing instead on Marcus and Jessica. You're suggesting an alternative to termination, he said to Marcus. What exactly? Before Marcus could answer, Patrick interrupted, his voice tense. Mr. Foster, we don't have much time. The story is spreading. If we don't take decisive action, the company's reputation is already at stake, Daniel finished. But I want to hear Marcus out. Marcus paced the small room, his military training evident in his precise movements. I've seen men make mistakes in combat. Some were removed from duty, yes, but the best commanders used those mistakes as teaching moments. He stopped, looking directly at Daniel. What if Jessica became part of a new training program, one that specifically addresses unconscious bias and dignity? Jessica's head snapped up, hope flickering in her eyes. Thomas stepped forward. Sir, if I may? As a veteran working for the airline, I'd be willing to help develop such a program. There are thousands of veterans who fly with us, who don't wear uniforms anymore, but deserve the same respect. Daniel rubbed his jaw, considering. The board will want blood. Then give them mine, Marcus said quietly. Tell them I requested clemency as a personal favor. Make me the face of the new initiative if you have to. Jessica stood, her voice finding new strength. "I don't deserve your help, Sergeant Thompson." "This isn't about what you deserve," Marcus replied. "It's about what's right for everyone." Outside, Mrs. Davis had somehow charmed her way past security and was speaking to a reporter, her pearl earrings catching the fluorescent light. "The airline has a responsibility to make this right," she was saying. "Not just for the sergeant, but for all of us." Back in the conference room, Daniel faced a decision that would define both his company's values and his personal integrity. Fire Jessica and appease the board and public outcry, or take the riskier path suggested by his oldest friend. He picked up the phone. "Get me the corporate jet," he told his assistant, "and prepare a statement. We're taking a different approach." He looked at Marcus. "I hope you know what you're doing." Marcus smiled faintly. "Rarely, but I know what kind of world I want to live in." The tension in the room was palpable as Daniel dialed the board chairman's number, everyone present aware that the next few minutes would determine not just Jessica's fate, but potentially the direction of the entire airline. The conference room door opened, and Captain Reynolds entered with Barbara close behind. The room was already crowded, but the addition of 2 more witnesses to the day's events heightened the tension. "The chairman wants to speak to everyone involved," Daniel announced, placing his phone on the table and switching to speaker mode. "Mr. Foster," came a clipped voice through the speaker. "I understand we have a situation that's rapidly becoming a PR nightmare." "Yes, sir," Daniel replied, straightening as if the chairman could see him. "But we also have an opportunity." Marcus stepped forward, addressing the disembodied voice. "Sir, this is Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson. I was the passenger involved in today's incident." A moment of silence followed. "The Medal of Honor recipient?" "Yes, sir, though that's not relevant to what I'm proposing." Jessica moved to stand beside Marcus, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "And I'm Jessica Winters, the flight attendant responsible. Before you make any decisions about my employment, I want to say something." She turned to face Marcus directly, ignoring everyone else in the room. "What I did was inexcusable. I judged you based solely on your appearance, and I treated you with disrespect you didn't deserve, that no one deserves. I'm not asking to keep my job." Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm asking for the chance to help make sure this never happens to anyone else." The room fell silent. Thomas and Barbara exchanged glances, Captain Reynolds nodded approvingly, and Diane's expression softened. Marcus held Jessica's gaze for a long moment before speaking. "I've served with people from every background imaginable. What mattered wasn't what they looked like or where they came from. It was whether they had your back when it counted." He addressed the phone again. "Sir, firing Ms. Winters might satisfy public outrage, but it won't solve the underlying problem. I'm proposing something more substantial, a complete overhaul of how Atlantic Airways approaches customer dignity." "And what exactly would that entail?" the chairman asked, skepticism evident in his tone. Daniel stepped in, a new energy in his voice. "A comprehensive training program developed with input from veterans like Marcus and Thomas. A review of our policies that might inadvertently encourage discriminatory behavior. And yes, public accountability, starting with an honest acknowledgement of what happened today." "And Ms. Winters?" the chairman pressed. All eyes turned to Jessica, who stood straight, prepared for judgment. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. "She's made a mistake. Now she deserves the chance to help fix the system that encouraged it." The chairman's sigh crackled through the speaker. "Mr. Foster, this is highly unorthodox." "Yes, sir," Daniel agreed. "So is integrity sometimes." A tense silence filled the room as they awaited the verdict. "Very well," the chairman finally conceded. "Make it happen." 3 months later, Marcus settled into Seat 2A on Flight 1452, the same route that had changed so many lives. He wore the same faded jeans and gray t-shirt. a quiet statement that went unnoticed by most passengers. Except one. "Mr. Thompson," came a familiar voice. Mrs. Davis eased into the seat across the aisle, pearl earrings catching the light. "What a delightful coincidence." Marcus smiled. "Mrs. Davis, heading to Chicago again?" "My granddaughter's recital," she confirmed. "I see you're still making your fashion statement." "Some habits die hard," he replied with a shrug. A flight attendant approached with pre-flight beverages. Not Jessica. She'd been reassigned to the training department, but someone who'd completed the new Dignity First program that had become mandatory for all Atlantic Airways staff. "Good afternoon, sir, ma'am," the young man said, offering a tray. "Welcome aboard." As the cabin filled, a group of soldiers in uniform boarded, immediately drawing the attention of the crew. Marcus watched as they were treated with quiet respect. No fuss, no special attention, just simple dignity. One of them caught Marcus's eye and nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement between veterans. Daniel's voice had been all over the news in recent weeks, speaking about Atlantic Airways' new initiative. What could have been a PR disaster had instead become a model for corporate responsibility. "We made a mistake," he'd said plainly to reporters. "Now we're fixing the system, not just the symptom." The airline's Dignity First program had expanded beyond veterans to include sensitivity training for all kinds of invisible differences. Jessica had found her voice as part of the training team, her experience becoming a powerful teaching tool. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Programs expanded to 3 more airlines. Board-approved national rollout next month. Marcus smiled, putting his phone away as Thomas appeared beside him. "Sergeant Thompson," Thomas said, now wearing senior crew stripes. "Everything to your satisfaction?" "Perfect, Corporal," Marcus replied. "How's the new position?" "Challenging," Thomas grinned. "But worth it. That was quite a domino you knocked over." Mrs. Davis leaned across the aisle. "Sometimes it takes a pebble to start an avalanche, young man." Marcus shook his head. "I just wanted to go home in peace." "And instead, you changed an entire company," Thomas said. "Not me," Marcus corrected. "All of us." As Thomas moved on, Mrs. Davis raised her glass in a subtle toast. "To dignity," she murmured. Marcus nodded, raising his own. "To dignity," he echoed. "No matter what it's wearing." Outside the window, the clouds stretched endlessly, unmarked by boundaries or divisions, just as it should be below.